We are talking the tropics with Louisiana State climatologist Dr. Barry Keim from Louisiana State University. Some new research that you and a team are working on. And Barry, you're kind of calling for an extension to hurricane season. Why don't you kind of summarize the idea behind that?
Yeah, well, for starters, we're finding that hurricane seasons are getting longer. They're starting earlier and they're ending later. In particular, they're starting earlier, though. It's way more pronounced on the early side. And what got us interested in this was the year 2020, when we had 30 named storms. Crazy year, so we started digging down on that a little bit. And then, of course, the next year, we have 21 named storms. That's the third busiest season. 2020 was the busiest. 2021 was the third busiest in 170 plus years. So we started digging more into that. And then we realized, wait a minute, 8 of the last 9 years have had what we call preseason storms. We've had named storms that have formed before hurricane season even started on June the 1st. So we opened the whole study up and we started just looking at the first storm of every season versus the last storm of every season. And we define hurricane season by the first day of that first storm and then the last day of the last storm of every season. And we wanted to see how that time was changing over time. And sure enough, it is. Now, what gets complicated about that, though, is the record is not homogeneous across time, because we didn't have satellites were a game changer in the early 1970s, late 1960s, where we hardly missed anything. Prior to that, we missed a lot. Well, so we clearly have a long-term trend toward earlier dates. But even if we isolate our data starting in 1970 to current, we still see the same kind of trends. And even after we filter out what we call short-lived storms, storms that last for 2 days or less, we're getting a lot more of those in the database now than we ever had before because of our ability to detect. So we filter those out. We still find trends. And then we have a kind of a relatively quiet period from 1970 to 1995. There's a trend during that period. And then from 1995 to current, which has been overly active, if you will, there's still a trend during that specific time period. So it does seem like the season is getting broader, and our recommendation to the Hurricane Center, I mean, they can do whatever they want, obviously. Our recommendation is that they probably should start hurricane season earlier than June 1st. And again, if you think about 8 of the last 9 years having a storm before hurricane season even starts, that should tell you something. And by the way, 2 of those years had 2 storms before June 1st. So there's a lot of things pointing towards starting hurricane season earlier.
So 3 interesting takeaways there. Even in a quiet period, you're seeing an uptick in the number of preseason storms. In an active period, you're seeing the same uptick, which would be more obvious. And you're even filtering out lesser, longer-lived storms or shorter-lived storms. And we're still finding that trend. So I guess the next question many might be wondering is, do you have any ideas on the cause?
Well, big question. I mean, is climate change playing some role? Probably. Is technology still playing some role? Even with all the filtering that we're doing on the data, we're still getting better and better. Even with satellite technology, that's being improved dramatically. And in fact, there was a major improvement in 2001, which has enabled us to really find lots more of these short-lived storms. So those are really becoming they're interesting, but they're kind of a problem in the data set. But so after we filter for all that, we still see the trends, but again, there's still some technological advances in there that may be aiding and abetting some of the trends that we're finding. So the jury's still kind of out as to what exactly the causes are, but we're still getting these events earlier, whether they've been there in the past or not, whether we just didn't identify them. And I just think it would make sense for we as a society to wrap our head around the fact that these storms are going to start coming sooner, and to just be prepared. And again, moving the season up is what they discussed. The Hurricane Center was discussing this a couple of years ago, moving it up a couple of weeks to about May 15th as a start. And given what's played out over the last decade or so, it just seems like it's making more and more sense to actually do it.
And they've already started issuing their tropical outlooks that they do daily and actually twice a day that we bring to you right here on the air on the Storm Station on May 15th. So it almost seems like the logical next step to, okay, let's just say the season starts at this time. If we're already, why are we issuing outlooks outside of season? Are there other reasons you can see that would be beneficial to officially designate the season as an earlier beginning?
Well, I think for preparation, I think it would just make sense to have people wrap their heads around the fact that they need a plan in place. do it earlier than June 1st, and you know, all the federal, state, and local agencies that deal in this arena, just to have them wrap their heads around this a little earlier than June 1st, because like I said, it's not unlikely that we can get a storm sometime in the month of May. So and even earlier. I mean, this year, heck, we had a named storm. Well, it technically wasn't named.
Yeah.
But it did reach tropical storm or subtropical storm strength back in January. So you know, every month is represented. So you know, we always have to be on our A game.
Yeah.
Now, having said all that, most of these early season storms are what I would call more nuisance storms. Mm-hmm. They're generally not very strong, and impacts are relatively small. But you know, a great example of an early season storm, not necessarily a preseason storm, is Hurricane Audrey. That was a June hurricane, got up to category 4 strength, if I recall correctly, and annihilated southwestern Louisiana in June. So I think that's the signal that you know, we just always need to be in our A game and have those plans in place. And what Mother Nature seems to be throwing at us more recently does suggest maybe we should move that hurricane season up a couple of weeks. I think it would be wise. I
think that's the message right there. The preparation should start earlier, and I guess regardless of what happens with the red tape or not, whether we snip it here on the coast in Louisiana and Mississippi, we should stay ready.
One other thing that you may want to weave into this is the way we define hurricane season is hurricane season begins on the first day of the first storm of every season, and it ends on the last day of the last storm of every season. Yeah. So that's the analysis that we did. And again, we just see this thing getting wider and wider, and most of the change is occurring more on the front end, but the back end is getting longer or later as well. But we're seeing more change on the front end. It seems to be coming earlier at a much more rapid rate.
All right, Louisiana State climatologist Dr. Barry Keim, thank you very much for your time, Barry.
My pleasure.
And we're listening. Hopefully, NOAA and the National Hurricane Center are listening as well.